Okay, I've got the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Got a great group this morning. That's fantastic. So, just a bit of housekeeping before we start our presentation. Participants in today's session will be muted during the broadcast. For comments during the session, just go ahead and use the chat tool like you would in a normal Zoom meeting. With the extra functions in a Zoom webinar, the chat tool may be under a button called More that has three little dots on top of it. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's broadcast, so I'll plan to get through as many of your questions as I can in our allotted 60-minute time. Just go ahead and post your questions now or anytime throughout the presentation. For questions for our Q&A session, you'll use not the chat tool, but the Q&A tool down in your Zoom or up or wherever your Zoom tools are. You can make your question anonymous. You do have to click the option for that, or else your name will show next to the question, which is also fine. If you see that somebody has also already answered a question that you wanted asked, or asked a question you wanted answered, you can upvote it. So take a look at the questions in Q&A that are already there. Once we do have some questions, go ahead and upvote it if you really want to hear the answer to that one. That'll raise it to the top of the list. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pause my video. Everyone just go ahead, take a look at the deck that we're presenting. Quick introduction, I'm Liza Town. I'm an HR consultant and coming to you live today from the beautiful prairie of Nebraska. So just outside Omaha here. I know most of you are in the Denver area, an area that I love to be in. I'm there usually once a month, pre-pandemic. Hopefully that will be the case again in the future. So let's jump right into our agenda. I want to thank everyone for taking an hour to spend with me to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So at a high level, here's what we'll cover today. We're going to talk about the why. Why are we here? Why is this an important topic? Second, what you need to know about diversity, equity, and inclusion, strategies and best practices in the workplace, and then how you can help create an intentional culture with positive DE&I outcomes. So here's what we want to accomplish together today. We want to understand the bottom line outcomes that result from strong diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. We also want to give you the tools that you need to contribute to a thriving culture rooted in DE&I best practices, empower you to create an inclusive work environment that's comfortable and encourages creativity, innovation, and diversity in thought, and also help your organization and move towards a true transformation when it comes to inclusion. So why do these things matter? McKinsey has been examining diversity in the workplace for several years. So in their latest report, Diversity Matters, they found that companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. So this is not just feel-good stuff. It does feel good, right, to include folks, but it's also, contributes directly to the company's bottom line. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. Diversity, equity, and inclusion also help you to expand your customer base. So increasing diversity opens up new customer markets. So customers, vendors, other business partners who look for organizations who understand an increasingly multicultural and multifaceted customer base, can demonstrate cultural intelligence. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means, what that looks like, and that are aligned by shared values. So 70% of millennial age consumers are more likely to choose one brand over another if that brand or company demonstrates inclusion, diversity, equity in its products, its services, promotions, in-store and facility experiences. DE&I practices also really help to attract top talent. So Glassdoor says that 72% of women versus 62% of men, 89% of African Americans, 80% of Asians, 70% of Latinos ranked workforce diversity as paramount in their job search. So when you hire for diversity, it opens up a wider talent pool. You've got more competitive market of applicants, increases the likelihood of finding candidates that have knowledge, skills, abilities that align with job demands. You know, another thing to point out is that millennial and Gen Z generations are the most diverse in history. So only 56% of the 87 million millennials in the US are white. That's compared to 72% of the 76 million baby boomers. So we're becoming a less white society overall. And companies that embrace that fact and hire and treat their employees, you know, with respect and include them are more likely to make it in the long run. So Harvard says that companies without diverse leadership, you know, women are 20% less likely than straight white men to win endorsement for their ideas. People of color are 24% less likely, and those who identify as LGBTQ are 21% less likely than their straight white counterparts to win endorsement for their ideas. So diversity in the workforce means having a multitude of different cultures, educational backgrounds, points of view present. These cultural, educational, and conceptual perspectives provide a richness of ideas that lead to stronger outcomes, making diversity, you know, a proven driver of innovation. And my slide doesn't want to advance. Stand by, guys. There we go. So monocultural workforces where everyone is kind of the same, right? As far as their ethnicity, their race, their gender, you know, sexual orientation, et cetera. They're more susceptible to what we call groupthink. So that can isolate an organization. It makes it really hard to remain relevant and viable in the long term. So diversity in workforce provides multiple sources of inspiration, points of view from different backgrounds, you know, better for reflecting diverse perspectives. So let's go ahead and define diversity, equity, and inclusion separately, right? Let's talk about how they are not the same as far as, you know, and how they are the same. So diversity does not equal inclusion. It does not equal equity. They're different concepts that can be used together. So diversity means the representation of different thoughts, opinions, and types of people within your organization. Inclusion means that individuals with different backgrounds are culturally and socially accepted and welcomed in the workplace. And equity means that everyone in the organization receives fair and equal treatment and has equal access to opportunities. So it's important to clarify that diversity, equity, and inclusion are each unique terms and concepts that come with different strategies. Some folks may have, you know, no issues to call out as far as diversity in their workplace, but they may need to work on inclusion or equity or both. So people tend to use these terms interchangeably or lump them together in the same strategy, but you don't have to do that. So workplace diversity does not necessarily equal workplace inclusion, right? This is just a very simple way to show you that. So on the left, you have, you know, what looks like diversity, right? Lots of different components, right? So think of these as people from different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, etc. They're all there, right? They're all present, but when you add inclusion to the mix, you know, that's when the puzzle pieces fit together, right? And you have something more cohesive that becomes a real boon for your workplace. So diversity is more than just race or gender. right? In the workplace, it means that an organization employs a diverse team of people that is reflective of the society in which it exists and operates. So along with race and gender, you have nationality, age, education, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disability status, etc. I love this quote. You can mandate diversity, but you can't mandate inclusion. Inclusion is about behavior, relationships. You have to change hearts and minds. So inclusion is the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. They have equal access to opportunities and resources and can contribute fully to the organization's success. So let's look at equality as it relates to equity. So equality means equal opportunity, whereas equity means equal access, right? So in this image, the person on the left is taller, and that's a privilege, right? They're able to reach what the shortest person cannot. In the image on the right, when the less privileged are armed with the resources that offer the same opportunities as their peers, that's when fairness is achieved. So in other words, equality is the end goal and equity is the means to get there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bias. This can be a challenging topic for folks in the workplace, but I think it's really an important one. So we're going to do a little activity here. Let's talk about why our intentions matter. So when we are doing a presentation like this live with a group, we would have a handout that we would give you, and it would look like this, right? What we would like you to do, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, go ahead and write this out. It really helps to see it in front of you. If not, think through this in your mind. Identify your top 5 closest friends. So not folks in your family, right? But the people that you've chosen to build relationships with. And then identify the characteristics that they have. So what I would like you to think about is those top 5 people that are closest to you. How similar are they to you? So while you're writing that down or thinking about it in your head, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. In just one moment, as soon as my poll allows me to. Oh, great. Our polls are not working today, guys. I am so sorry. Let me give this another shot here. Technology is fantastic when it works. Okay. So the gist of this, guys, is that we want to have you take a look at how close are the people in your life, you know, to you. How much are they the same as you? How much are they different than you? You know, intention really does matter, right? Are we seeking out folks in our lives that are just like us, that are very similar to us? You know, and that is pretty natural to do so. But what are you learning from those folks? Are you learning anything different? Do you have any, you know, are you gaining any, you know, cultural experience by surrounding yourself with people that are very similar to you? So let's move on, since I couldn't get that lovely poll to work. Talk about bias in a little more detail. So we'll talk about implicit versus explicit bias. Unconscious or implicit bias is a term used to describe the associations that we hold, which, despite being outside of our conscious awareness, can have a significant influence on our attitudes and our behavior. So regardless of how fair-minded we believe ourselves to be, most people have some degree of unconscious bias on board. That means that we automatically respond to others, so people from different racial or ethnic groups, for example, in positive or negative ways, right? These associations are really difficult to override, regardless of whether we recognize them to be wrong or not, because they're really deeply ingrained in our thinking and in our emotions. So unconscious or implicit bias operates outside of our awareness, right? We don't even know it's there. It's in the background. It's in our subconscious minds, and this really governs how we react to folks. It can be in direct contradiction to our espoused beliefs and values. So conscious or explicit bias, on the other hand, the person is very clear about their feelings or their attitudes, their biases. They're on the surface, they're clear about them. Their related behaviors are conducted with intent. When you see examples of conscious bias, you might see overt negative behavior, or more subtle means such as exclusion, etc. So there is some science behind unconscious bias. So here's what we know. Unconscious biases develop at an early age. Biases emerge during middle childhood and appear to develop across childhood. Unconscious biases have real world effects on behavior, but they are malleable, right? So we can take steps to minimize the impact of unconscious bias in our lives. That's the good news here. So there's been a lot of research that's been published demonstrating the impact of unconscious bias in various domains. So in criminal justice system, for example, in education, healthcare, mental health care, and also in hiring and in the workplace. In a couple different studies that have been done, in the past decade or so, in one, fictitious resumes with white sounding names and African American sounding names were sent in a response to a job posting. There were no material differences between the resumes. It was just the names, right? The resumes with white sounding names, however, received 50% more callbacks for interviews. In another study, hiring managers rated male applicants for a lab manager position significantly more competent than their equally skilled female applicants. The hiring managers also selected a higher starting salary and offered more career and mentoring opportunities to the male candidates. All right. So how can we address our biases if they're unconscious, if we don't know that we have them, right? That seems like a really hard mountain to climb. But when you think about it, with the information that we're armed with now about unconscious bias, the "I don't know I have them" argument really is no excuse for not addressing your biases, right? It does take work, it takes intention, commitment. But if you want to be part of fostering an inclusive world and an inclusive workplace, it truly does start with the work that you're going to do with yourself. So let's talk about some steps that we can take, right? By definition, unconscious means that we're not aware, but we have 5 ways to uncover those biases. So assume that you have unconscious bias, right? Because we all do. Conduct research on yourself, right? So what are some behaviors that suggest that you might have some hidden biases about particular groups? Do you hire, if you're in a position to make hiring decisions, do you hire the same type of people all the time? Do you find racial or ethnic, gender, LGBT differences something that you would rather not talk about or address? Does it make you uncomfortable to have those conversations? Do you laugh at jokes about other groups? Okay. Step 3, make a list of groups that are different from you and your group. So it's human nature, like we said before, to be more positive about groups that we're a part of, right, than groups that we're not a part of. But the groups that you're not a part of, how do you interact with those groups? Do you interact with those groups? Do you know much about the other groups? And then what adjectives would you use to describe the other groups on your list? So step 4, ask a trusted friend or an associate how they perceive you. This is challenging, right? It can be hard for friends or family, people that know us, to give us honest feedback. Find that person that's going to give it to you straight, though. And just tell them it's important to you to know these things. ask them what are some behaviors that that they've noticed with you that would suggest that you have unconscious bias about a particular group. And then step 5, take it a little bit further and examine your worldview, right? Do you tend to think in absolutes? Is everything black and white? Right or wrong, good or bad? Or do you think in more relative terms? So something may not be right for you, but could you understand how it could be right for someone else? Do you tend to make quick judgments about what you see, or are you more of a reflective until you have additional information? And when you see behaviors that are different, do you interpret them from your own cultural lens, or do you describe them in neutral terms until you have additional information? So another way that you can test yourself for hidden biases is go to understandingprejudice.org. And we are going to send out this deck once our sessions are completed next week. So you don't, if you don't want to write this all down or don't have a way to write this website down now, that's fine. But understandingprejudice.org, they have what's called implicit association tests. They're free. Sometimes they're referred to as IATs. Just test yourself. Take the quizzes and see if, the quizzes show that you might have a little bit of implicit bias on board. So before we move forward, I'll do just another quick shout out for, our Q&A session at the end of our broadcast today. If you have any questions that you would like to have answered, go ahead and put those in the Q&A session. If you see a question that is already asked that you really want to hear an answer to, go ahead and upvote it. Let's talk a little bit about how do we appreciate differences, people that are different than us. So 43% of workers in the US still believe that discussions about race in particular are inappropriate at work. So it starts by talking about it, acknowledging the differences in each other. It's okay to have these conversations at work. By being open-minded to discussing race and ethnicity in the workplace, employers can begin to have more honest conversations about our unique differences and experiences. Being colorblind disregards our remarkable differences, right? So an employer or, someone in the workplace that says, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, that's not really that doesn't feel good, right? To folks that are different from, your straight white male, norm, right? So let's talk about race versus ethnicity. Right, race is usually associated with biology, excuse me, and linked with physical characteristics. So your skin, color, hair texture generally can't be hidden, right? Ethnicity, on the other hand, is linked with cultural expression and identification. So it can be displayed or hidden depending on individual choice. Race is biological, where ethnicity is cultural, right? Ethnicity can be adopted, ignored, broadened, while racial characteristics cannot. They just are what they are. Ethnicity still has subcategories, while races no longer do. But both race and ethnicity have been used to subjugate or persecute people. So some sociologists believe that racial divisions are based more on sociological concepts than biological principles. So microaggressions, this is something that can happen to people because of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, sexual orientation, etc. According to Forbes, microaggressions come in 3 forms. So microassaults happen when a coworker, makes a racist joke, is unaware that the joke is racist, or is aware that the joke is racist, yet claims that the joke is harmless. When a person purposely behaves or speaks in a racist way or uses racist symbols. Another example of a microassault might be a manager, being told that they need to keep a close eye on a Black employee or not give white employees their requested days off, things like that. A micro insult is a verbal or a nonverbal behavior that demeans a person's race, expresses rudeness and insensitivity. So an example of a micro insult people can use them either to be aware or unaware of their racism, right? So it could be it could be implicit bias on board. An example would be a white coworker asking a black coworker how she was able to get her job, right? The implied meaning is you didn't get the job on your own merits. How insulting for that black coworker to hear something like that, right? And then a micro invalidation is a form of communication that attempts to negate, exclude, or ignore a person based on their race. So people that give out micro invalidations usually deny that they're being racist. For example, a white coworker may ask a black coworker where she's from, something she wouldn't ask from her other white coworkers, right? The hidden meaning there is you don't belong here. So often when we hear or experience a microaggression, you experience this internal dilemma, right? Did I just hear that correctly? Did she say what I think she just said? Oh, if you witness somebody else, being the victim of a microaggression, should I say something? Right? For the most part, sometimes well-meaning bystanders who have noticed it, they're concerned, but that saying something might only make it worse, or that speaking up would only add more hurt than it might help. We gaslight ourselves, right? Maybe I didn't interpret what they just said correctly. But the person who's directly on the receiving end of that microaggression is likely experiencing a wave of emotions, right? They're feeling humiliated, they're feeling helpless. Down the road, those feelings can result in anxiety, depression, diminished confidence, diminished performance in the workplace. And additionally, racial and gender microaggressions can and do compound. That ultimately creates, an in-hospital or a hostile workplace. And that can lead to attrition, folks just leaving their jobs. So there are many good reasons to confront a microaggression head on at the time, both for the offender and the offended, right? So those include helping the offender who might not have meant to cause harm, right? That might be their implicit bias talking, could help them realize their bias, change their behavior. And it also sets a norm for what behavior is, tolerable or acceptable. So some things you can do to combat microaggressions in real time. Ask a clarifying question, come from a place of curiosity and then listen openly. Here's what I heard you say, right? Can you clarify what you meant by that? Tell others about your experience, right? How did it make you feel when you heard that or witnessed that behavior? Encourage others to consider the impact of their words or actions. Well, how do you think it made people feel when you said this, when you did that? And then own your response. When I hear your comment, this is how it makes me feel. And then identify next steps, request appropriate action. So I would appreciate it if you would not say that. You would not do that, moving forward. Set the standard for what you expect. Okay. So let's talk about some different ways that we can create an inclusive work environment. So we're going to start just talking about gender and gender identity. We use the gender unicorn. I don't know if some of you may have seen this before. When we talk about gender identity, it really helps to kind of break down the differences between identity, expression, sexual orientation. So gender identity, that's an individual's personal sense of having a particular gender. Now, gender exists on a continuum, right? It's not just male or female. Some folks may have a sense of being a different gender or genderless, right? Gender expression then is the way that a person expresses their gender identity. Typically that's through their appearance, dress, behavior, the way they talk, etc. Now, sexual orientation is really completely separate from gender identity. So sexual orientation refers to a person's identity in relation to the gender or genders to which they are attracted to. So somebody could be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, etc. So some terminology when we're talking about gender identity that's really important. A birth name refers to the name that we were given at birth, right? So my birth name is Liza. Um, a living name refers to the name that a transgender, non-binary, or a gender non-conforming person chooses to use, right? So a dead naming then is a term for calling a trans or non-binary person who has chosen to change their name by their former birth name. So dead naming can lead to gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria occurs when a person experiences serious emotional distress due to the gender they were assigned at birth differing from the gender that they know themselves to be. So not all trans folks experience gender dysphoria, but for those who do, using incorrect pronouns or dead naming them can really contribute to that stress. So what do we do if we want to create a gender inclusive work environment? We can use terms like cisgender or cis when we're speaking about folks who live as the sex that they were assigned at birth, as opposed to using terms like normal. So if I say normal, it can be considered discriminatory, as it sets those who are not cisgender apart and says you're other, you're different. Using correct pronouns is a really important way to show respect for a person's gender identity. So folks can consider adding a pronoun block to your email signature. For example, my pronoun block says Liza Town. In parentheses underneath that, it says she and her. Those are my pronouns. Some folks prefer he, him, or she, her gendered pronouns, but others might prefer a gender neutral term, such as they or them, or they might be comfortable with several terms, right? So when in doubt, just ask, right? Create a culture where respect outweighs discomfort, right? It's more important to respect that person and their pronouns than it is for those of us asking the question to be comfortable. And then as soon as an employee or a coworker announces their intent to transition, we should all just be prepared to respect their choice of name, the pronouns that they want to use, the restroom they want to use, etc. So let's take a little break from me talking for a second. I have a video that I would like to share. I'm going to go ahead and share my sound. We're going to play this. It's about a 3-minute video. This person is talking about how it feels to be misgendered. So we're going to play this and then we'll talk it through when we're done.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Wild and welcome to my channel, Ashley's Wild Life. This week on the Gender Resources playlist, what to do if you have accidentally misgendered someone. This video is inspired by the fact that I am misgendered almost constantly, and specifically motivated by something that happened to me this past week. I am in the waiting room at a doctor's office, waiting for the doctor to come out and tell me information about my mom. I've never seen the doctor before, she's never seen me before. We have only ever spoken on the phone. I am the only person in the waiting room. And suddenly a woman comes in, so I say, hi. She looks around the room and says, hi, and then leaves. Then I get a phone call, and it's the doctor. She says, hey, I'm not sure where you are. I looked for you in the waiting room. I'm like, well, I'm in the waiting room. So she says, oh, I must have missed you. And she comes back, and she looks at me, and what she decides to say is, hey, pretty lady. What? This story sparked something for me, and what it sparked for me is how uncomfortable it makes people to treat trans individuals like regular human beings. If you misgender someone, you should treat it the way you would treat anything that you accidentally do that is rude. If you're a waitress and you're serving a table and you accidentally step on the toe of the customer, you don't stop and be like, great shoes. No, you politely apologize for stepping on their toe and you get back to the business of being a waitress. It was so uncomfortable. and so isolating in that moment to feel like on top of misgendering me, which was an accident, but it still doesn't feel good. Now you're overcompensating, trying to get on my good side. This is a different conversation if we're talking about friends or family or someone who you are going to have a lasting relationship with, but this is a functional situation. Don't get on my good side. Apologize for the rude thing that you did, and then go back to treating me like a regular human being. I don't need a doctor to tell me I'm a pretty lady. I need a doctor to tell me how my mom is doing. I need you to treat me the same way you would treat anybody else. It's embarrassing when you realize that you've misgendered someone. And I get it. It's awkward. You don't know what to do. So here's what you do. Just apologize and treat me like a regular person. Because gender isn't visible, because it's something that we feel and we know about ourselves, misgendering will probably always happen. If you want to avoid misgendering to the best of your ability, ask someone what their pronouns are and how they would want to be referred to. But in any case, we all make mistakes. So just, if you misgender someone and you're uncomfortable, don't make your discomfort that person's problem. Apologize and let it go. Thank you all for watching. Bye-bye. I'm running a Patreon campaign. If you know.
All right. So pretty powerful message from somebody that, gets misgendered frequently. Just a little bit of food for thought there. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts. When it comes to gender, assumptions kill inclusivity, right? Maybe don't ask a person who's gender nonconforming, transgendered, what does your husband or wife do? Instead, maybe ask, what does your partner do, right? Take the gender out of that question. Don't assume gender identity based on perceived sex, right? Either she or he. Ask instead, what are your pronouns? Don't ask invasive questions regarding a coworker's transition. Consider whether the question is a need to know or a nice to know, and then educate yourself on the nice to know stuff, right? Any other questions that you have about, gender, etc., go ahead and stick those in the Q&A. So let's talk about generational differences. So this is the first time in American history where we've had 5 different generations working side by side in the workplace. So each generation has distinct attitudes, behaviors, expectations, habits, different motivational buttons. And then research indicates that people communicate a lot based on their generational backgrounds. So the makeup of generations in the workplace right now, the largest group is millennials. 35% of the American workforce is millennial, born from 81 to 2000. Next, we have Generation X, folks that were born between 65 and 1980. 33%. 25% of the workforce is made up of baby boomers. So those are folks that were born from 1946 to 1964. Gen Z is just now kind of starting to join the workplace. 5% of the workforce is Generation Z, born from 2001 to current to 2020. And then we have 2% of the workforce that belong to the traditionalist generation, folks that were born between 1925 and 1945. So this is a fun little exercise. When we're face to face, we have folks kind of shout out answers. In this situation, I'm just going to kind of walk you through it here. Just kind of wondering how much you know about each generation. I would love to hear, in the chat as we go along, if any of this surprises you. So which generation can really be described as self-sacrificing? It's going to be your traditionalists. Which generations appreciate immediate feedback? Millennials and Generation Z. Immediate feedback. Folks that work to live, right, instead of living to work, that really value a work-life balance. Those are the younger generations, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. And what generations are private and reserved? That's going to be your traditionalists. The generation that is not overall self-directed, millennials. So I find that really interesting. Overall, millennials are usually described as self-directed in the workplace, but they're bookended by generations that are, right? So Gen X and Gen Z can be described as self-directed. So just interesting. What generation lives to work? Who are the workaholics? And that's going to be your baby boomers. And the generations that value independence and individuality, Gen Z by far. And the generations that are motivated by company loyalty are going to be your traditionalists and your boomers. So pretty interesting. And again, if you have any comments or thoughts about that, go ahead and stick those in chat. So, we've got so many generations in the workplace today. Employers really need to look out for culture clashes in age diverse employee populations. So 86% of workers say that they have observed conflict or frustration at work caused by what they perceive to be a difference in generations. Sentiments and phrases like "okay, boomer" or calling a woman a Karen are increasingly, taken to be offensive, ageist, and things to watch out for in the workplace, especially. So Hayden Shaw is an expert in generational differences in the workplace. Hayden says that statistical generalizations are an aid to conversation, but not a substitute for it, right? So we went through the statistics a couple slides ago, but when it comes to understanding another person, nothing replaces conversation, right? So instead of relying solely on the data surrounding generational differences, it's important to have open conversations about what Hayden refers to as the sticking points for generations. So step one of the 5 steps to understanding other people from different generations, right? Acknowledge, right? Talk about generational differences. You can't solve a problem if you don't acknowledge that it exists, right? Step 2, appreciate. So focus on the why, not the what, and the common needs, right? It's the what that divides us, but the why is the uniter, as it were. Be prepared to flex, right? Agree on how to accommodate different approaches. And leverage. So maximize the strengths of each generation. For example, if an organization decides to use a messaging platform, Slack, for example, as a communication tool, there might be people who are uncomfortable with the technology that they don't recognize, they don't understand. Think about a baby boomer who's been in the workplace for a really long time and now is suddenly being asked to use Slack, right? A manager or a leader could recruit an older team member who's comfortable and experienced in using this technology to help coach, train, and mentor the novice Slack users, right? And then finally, resolve. So determine which option is going to yield the best results, if flexing isn't enough. So let's talk about how you can contribute to an inclusive working environment. First and foremost, I think it's really important to just reflect your organizational values in every interaction that you have, right? Roy Disney says it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. We're all guided by our core values, so those should serve as our North Star, right, for all workplace interactions, both internally with each other and externally with our customers and our consumers. So some strategies that we can use to achieve inclusion: you strengthen your awareness and appreciation for different perspectives, for people that are different than you. Create cultural awareness through maybe book clubs at work, guest speakers, etc. Promote healthy relationships and friendships among colleagues through social or community involvement. Provide each other with a safe space to voice concerns. We need to be able to have these conversations in the workplace and feel comfortable doing that. Focus on effective conflict resolution techniques. Cultivate a work environment where people are treated with respect always, right, at all times. And then celebrate important events. So not just the US, the bank holidays, right? Juneteenth, Gay Pride, International Day of Persons with Disabilities, International Women's Day. These are all great things for folks to celebrate in the workplace. A couple key takeaways. Diversity, equity, and inclusion really should be a business strategy. Everyone should do their part to create a positive and inclusive working environment. Reflect on your organizational values in every interaction, and also be alert to inappropriate conduct. Quick to hold each other accountable to inclusive behaviors. And, when all else fails, engage with your manager or HR right away if concerns arise. So I want to give a little shout out to a deeper learning opportunity. So there was a racial incident at a Starbucks store in 2018 that got a lot of press. So Starbucks actually worked with Arizona State University to create this really cool curriculum. It was initially for their employees, but they've gone ahead and made it free and available to everyone. It addresses bias through understanding kind of the human experience. So they have curriculum on gender bias, racial bias, ethnic bias, 15 different courses. Really cool, totally free. The courses are called To Be Welcoming. So you can Google To Be Welcoming or go to tobewelcoming.com to take any or all of those free courses. All right, so we have a few minutes left for questions. If you have any burning questions, put those in the Q&A. Now we have one question in Q&A right now. And I believe, Dana or Dana, sorry if I mispronounced your name, let me know if I'm incorrect, but I believe that your question came about when we were talking about holding folks accountable to unconscious bias. So if that's not the case, go ahead and let me know in chat. But the question is, how do you deal with those who are angry with everyone about it? So, if you are, doing your part to, combat microaggressions, right, head on, and you have an interaction with somebody that is particularly contentious or angry, we're not saying that you should go pick fights at your job, right? That's not what this is about at all. I think you have to meet people where they are. So if your attempt to combat or call out a microaggression results in, a lot of anger or confrontation from the person that you're talking to, you've done your part by just calling it out, right? Maybe that's all that person can handle right now. So at that point, advocate for a peaceful workplace, and I would say remove yourself from that situation. So another question, if another employee's comment about my differences continues to bother me, how should I handle it? You should immediately be talking to your manager, talk to your HR partner. Everyone has the right to feel respected, treated fairly in the workplace. And if you feel like you're being harassed or retaliated against for standing up for your rights, allow your advocates at work to handle that for you. Okay, another question. How do you feel about what Nelson Mandela has said, but I don't see what Nelson Mandela said? So anonymous attendee, if you could expound on that, give a couple minutes for that quote to pop up. Nelson Mandela said all kinds of awesome things, so. Okay. As we're waiting for that quote to pop up, I'll just let everyone know at the end of this session, you'll automatically be redirected to a survey. really quick. It'll take you 2 minutes, I promise. I would love to know, what you thought about the session. Was it valuable information? Was it relevant to you? What are your ideas for other sessions that you think you would like to go through with us? And any other comments that you have. So if you would please take a couple minutes to complete the survey, I would really appreciate that. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to see the rest of that Mandela quote. Oh, nope, I got it. Our world is not divided by race, color, gender, or religion. Our world is divided into wise people and fools. Fools divide themselves by race, color, gender, or religion. Interesting. So, me being in HR, I'm not going to say you're a fool, right? That's not really probably appropriate. But however, I think that Mandela is probably onto something as far as, it is human nature, I think, to categorize, right? I fit in this category, you fit in that category, and that's how I understand the world, right? That's how we understand the world around us. But when we allow those categories to start dividing us or creating tensions like we're seeing in the world today, that is foolish, right? That's a pretty cool quote. I might actually include that in upcoming sessions. Thank you, anonymous attendee, for posting that. I appreciate it. All right, guys, so if we have no further questions, I'll go ahead and give you back a few minutes in your day. Please do take a couple minutes to answer our survey. Let us know how we did today, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day and your week. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.